Welcome back to Easy English Talk Podcast.
Welcome to the Easy English Talk Podcast, everyone. It is really great to have you here with us today. Priya, hey, good to see you again. How has your day been so far?
Hey, Ryan. Honestly, it has been a pretty calm day, which is nice for a change. I spent the morning reading some news articles, and one story really caught my attention. I have been thinking about it all day. How about you? How has your day been?
My day has been good, thank you. I also spent some time reading the news this morning, and I think we probably read about the same thing. It's one of those stories that makes you stop and think about how the world is connected. But before we get into that, I want to say hello to everyone listening right now.
Yes, absolutely. It is always wonderful to know that people from so many different places are tuning in. It really makes this whole experience feel special and meaningful for both of us.
So, wherever you are right now, whether you're listening from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, or any other part of the world, we're glad you're here. I would love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment and tell us your city or country.
And while you're at it, let us know how the podcast is helping you. We always love hearing whether it's helping you improve your English or even giving you something new to think about. Your feedback truly helps us make better episodes.
That is right. If this podcast is helping your English or helping you grow as a person, just write a short comment. It means a lot to us, and it helps other learners find us too. Now, Priya, I want to say something before we begin today.
Sure, go ahead, Ryan. I think I know what you're about to say, and I agree completely. Today feels a little different from our usual episodes.
Yes, exactly. Today's topic is a little different from what we usually discuss. It's not a typical self-improvement or language topic, but we thought about it carefully and we both felt it was really important to talk about. It's something that affects everyone, no matter where you live.
I completely agree. When we were preparing for this episode, we realized that this topic connects to everyday life in ways that most people don't even realize. It touches the price of the things you buy, the fuel in your car, and even the cost of food on your table.
So today we're discussing why the Strait of Hormuz crisis could shake the entire global economy. Now, I know that might sound like a complicated topic, but we're going to break it down in a very simple and clear way so that everyone can understand it easily.
And that's exactly what makes this episode worth staying for. By the end, you'll understand what the Strait of Hormuz is, why it matters so much, and how problems there can affect your daily life. You'll also learn some very useful English words and expressions along the way.
So if you have ever wondered why oil prices suddenly go up, or why tensions in one part of the world make prices rise in another part, this episode will give you clear answers. I promise it'll be worth your time, so please stay with us until the very end.
Yes, and we're going to keep it simple, step by step, like a calm conversation between friends. No complicated political language, no confusing terms, just a clear and honest discussion about something that truly matters.
All right, so let us begin at the very beginning. Priya, for people who have never heard of the Strait of Hormuz, can you explain what it is in simple words?
Of course. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway, like a thin passage of sea. It sits between Iran on one side and Oman and the United Arab Emirates on the other side. It connects the Persian Gulf to the open ocean.
So when you say narrow, how narrow are we talking about? Because I think many people imagine the ocean as this huge, wide open space, but this is quite different, right?
Yes, exactly. At its narrowest point, it's only 33 kilometers wide. And the shipping lanes, the paths that the big oil tanker ships actually use, are even narrower. Each lane is only about 3 kilometers wide. So it's a very tight space for very large ships.
That is really narrow when you think about the size of those ships. I've seen pictures of oil tankers, and they are absolutely massive. So imagine these giant ships moving through a space that's only a few kilometers wide. It sounds like it could easily become a problem.
It really can. And the important thing to understand is that this is not just any waterway. It's probably the most important waterway in the entire world for energy. A huge amount of the world's oil passes through this narrow strait every single day.
Let us talk about the numbers, because I think the numbers really help people understand how important this place is. How much oil actually moves through the Strait of Hormuz?
The numbers are truly stunning. Roughly 20 to 21 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That is about 20% of all the oil the world uses. So 1 out of every 5 barrels of oil in the world travels through this tiny passage.
1 out of every 5. That is a huge amount. So if something happens and ships cannot pass through, 1/5 of the world's oil supply is suddenly blocked. That would be an enormous problem.
Absolutely. And it is not just oil. Liquefied natural gas, which many countries use for heating and electricity, also passes through the strait in large quantities. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and India depend heavily on gas that comes through this route.
So we're not just talking about gasoline for cars. We're talking about the energy that powers homes, factories, hospitals, and businesses in countries all over the world. This strait is like a lifeline for global energy.
That is a perfect way to describe it, Ryan. A lifeline. And when a lifeline is threatened, everything connected to it starts to feel the pressure. That is exactly why any crisis in this area sends waves of worry across the entire world.
Now, let us talk about why there is a crisis in the first place. What is actually happening near the Strait of Hormuz that is making people nervous? Can you give us some background?
Sure. The region around the Strait of Hormuz has been tense for many years. Iran, which sits on one side of the strait, has had long-standing disagreements with several Western countries, especially the United States. These disagreements involve politics, nuclear energy programs, and economic sanctions.
And when you say sanctions, for our listeners who might not know that word, sanctions are basically punishments that one country or a group of countries puts on another country. They block trade, freeze money, and try to put economic pressure on that country.
Exactly. That's a great explanation. So when sanctions are placed on Iran, it hurts their economy. And Iran has sometimes responded by threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz. The idea is simple. If Iran cannot sell its oil freely, then maybe other countries should not be able to ship their oil freely either.
That is a very powerful threat, because as we just discussed, 20% of the world's oil moves through that strait. If Iran blocks it or makes it dangerous for ships to pass, the whole world feels the impact immediately.
And it's not just threats. There have been real incidents. Ships have been seized, meaning they have been captured and held. There have been attacks on tankers. Drones have been used. Military forces from several countries are present in the area. It is a very tense situation.
So the crisis is not something that might happen in the future. It's already happening in some ways. The tension is already there, and the risk is very real. Every time there is a new incident, oil prices jump, and markets around the world react.
That is exactly right. And I think this is where we need to help our listeners understand the connection between what happens in this narrow waterway and what happens in their everyday lives. Because many people hear about these things on the news and think it doesn't affect them.
But it does affect them, and that's the key point. Let us talk about how. So, Priya, when there is a problem at the Strait of Hormuz and oil cannot flow freely, what is the first thing that happens?
The first thing that happens is that oil prices go up. This is basic economics. When the supply of something decreases but the demand stays the same, the price rises. If ships cannot pass through the strait safely, the supply of oil drops and the price per barrel increases quickly.
And when the price of oil goes up, it doesn't just affect the oil companies, it affects everything. Because oil is used to make so many things and to transport almost everything we buy. So the cost of oil is like a hidden cost inside almost every product.
That is such an important point. Think about it this way. The food in your grocery store was transported by trucks. Those trucks use fuel. If fuel becomes more expensive, it costs more to transport the food, and the store passes that extra cost to the customer by raising prices.
So the price of bread, vegetables, milk, and meat can all go up because of something that happened thousands of kilometers away in a narrow waterway. That's how connected our world is today.
And it's not just food. The clothes you wear, the electronics you buy, the materials used to build houses, all of these things are transported by ships, trucks, and planes. When fuel prices rise, the cost of everything rises with it. Economists call this a ripple effect.
I like that term, ripple effect. It is like when you throw a stone into a calm lake. The stone hits the water in one spot, but the ripples spread outward in every direction. A crisis at the Strait of Hormuz is the stone, and the ripples reach every corner of the world.
That is a beautiful way to explain it. And those ripples can be very strong. In the past, when oil prices suddenly increased, entire economies slowed down. People spent more on fuel and energy, which meant they had less money to spend on other things. Businesses struggled, and some people lost their jobs.
Let us go a little deeper into this. Which countries would be most affected if the Strait of Hormuz was blocked or became too dangerous for ships?
Great question. The countries that would be hit the hardest are the ones that depend most on oil from the Persian Gulf. Countries like Japan, South Korea, India, and China import a huge percentage of their oil through this strait. For them, a blockage would be a serious energy crisis.
And what about European countries? I imagine they would feel the effects too, even if they do not import all their oil from that region.
Yes, absolutely. European countries would also be affected because oil is a global market. Even if a European country buys its oil from somewhere else, like Norway or Africa, the overall global price of oil would still rise. When supply drops anywhere in the world, prices rise everywhere in the world.
That is a really important concept for our listeners to understand. Oil does not have separate prices for separate countries. There is essentially a global price, so when supply is threatened in one major area, the price goes up for everyone, everywhere.
Exactly. And the United States, even though it produces a lot of its own oil, would also feel the effects. American consumers would see higher prices at the gas station, American businesses would face higher transportation costs, and the stock market would likely react with a lot of uncertainty.
Speaking of uncertainty, I think that is another huge part of this crisis that we need to talk about. It's not just the actual disruption of oil supply that causes problems. It's also the fear and uncertainty. Can you explain how that works?
Yes, this is fascinating and a bit scary at the same time. Financial markets, like stock markets, react to fear just as much as they react to real events. When investors and traders hear about tension at the Strait of Hormuz, they start to worry. They think about the worst possible outcome.
And when they worry, they start making changes. They might sell their stocks, move their money to safer investments, or increase the price of oil futures, which is basically the price of oil that will be delivered in the future. All of this drives prices up even before anything actually happens.
That is exactly right. So even if the strait is never fully blocked, just the threat of it being blocked can cause real economic damage. Companies delay investments, consumers become careful with spending, and governments start making emergency plans. The uncertainty itself becomes a problem.
It's like living in a house near a river that floods sometimes. Even when the river is calm, you're always a little bit worried. And that worry changes how you live, how you plan, and how you spend your money.
That is a perfect comparison. And this constant state of tension is what many energy experts and economists are worried about right now. The situation near the Strait of Hormuz has been tense for a long time, but there are signs that it could become more serious.
Let's talk about that. What are some of the recent developments that have made this situation more concerning?
Well, without going into every political detail, there have been increased military activities in the region. Several countries have sent warships and military equipment to the area. There have been reports of drones flying near commercial ships, and some tankers have been stopped or redirected.
And I think the political relations between the major countries involved have also become more complicated. There are more disagreements, more sanctions, and less communication. When countries stop talking to each other, the risk of a mistake or an escalation goes up.
Exactly. And one thing that worries experts is the possibility of an accident. In such a tense environment with military ships from many different countries operating in a very small space, the chance of a mistake is real. A miscalculation or a misunderstanding could quickly turn into a larger conflict.
And if a larger conflict breaks out near the Strait of Hormuz, the economic consequences would be enormous. We are not just talking about higher oil prices anymore. We're talking about potential global recession, which means the entire world economy slowing down significantly.
That is the worst case scenario, and while we hope it never happens, it's important for people to understand the possibility. A major disruption at the Strait of Hormuz could lead to oil prices doubling or even tripling in a very short time. That would send shockwaves through every economy on Earth.
Now, I think at this point, some of our listeners might be feeling a bit worried, which is understandable. But let us shift the conversation a little bit and talk about solutions. What can be done to reduce the risk and protect the global economy from this kind of crisis?
That is a great transition, Ryan. Let us start with one of the most important solutions, which is diversifying energy sources. Diversifying means not depending on just one thing. If the world depends less on oil from the Persian Gulf, then a crisis at the Strait of Hormuz would have less impact.
And how can countries diversify their energy? What are the options available to them?
There are several options. First, countries can invest more in renewable energy, like solar power, wind power, and hydroelectric power. These sources of energy do not depend on any shipping route. They come from nature, and they can be produced locally within each country.
That makes a lot of sense. If a country can generate its own electricity from the sun or wind, it does not need to import as much oil or gas. That reduces the country's dependence on the Strait of Hormuz and makes it more resilient, meaning more able to handle problems.
Exactly. And many countries are already moving in this direction. European countries, for example, have invested heavily in wind energy. Countries in the Middle East, like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, are also building large solar energy projects, even though they have plenty of oil.
It is interesting that oil-producing countries are also investing in renewable energy. That tells you something about how the world is changing. Even the countries that benefit most from selling oil understand that the future is moving toward cleaner and more diverse energy sources.
That is a very smart observation, Ryan, and it leads us to another important solution, which is building strategic oil reserves. Many countries keep large amounts of oil stored in safe locations. If there is a sudden crisis, they can use the stored oil to keep their economy running while the crisis is resolved.
Right. I know the United States has something called the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is a huge amount of oil stored underground. Other countries have similar reserves. The idea is that if oil imports are suddenly cut off, the country has enough stored oil to last for several weeks or months.
Yes, and these reserves are very important. They act like a safety net. They give countries time to find other solutions without immediately falling into an energy crisis. However, these reserves are not unlimited, so they are really a short-term solution while longer-term answers are found.
That is a good point. Reserves buy you time, but they don't solve the underlying problem. You still need a longer-term plan. What else can be done?
Another important solution is building alternative shipping routes. Right now, a lot of oil has to go through the Strait of Hormuz because there is no easy alternative. But some countries are building pipelines, which are large tubes that carry oil over land, bypassing the strait completely.
Can you give us an example of a pipeline that does this?
Sure. Saudi Arabia has a pipeline called the East-West Pipeline that can carry oil from the eastern oil fields to the Red Sea coast on the western side. This means that some Saudi oil can reach the market without ever going through the strait. The UAE also has a pipeline that goes to a port on the Gulf of Oman.
So these pipelines are like backup routes. If the main road is blocked, you take a different route to get to the same destination. That's smart planning. Although I imagine building these pipelines is very expensive and takes many years.
It is. Pipelines are expensive and take time to build, and they have their own risks, like leaks or political problems in the countries they pass through. But they are still an important part of the solution because they reduce the world's dependence on a single narrow waterway.
Now let us talk about another angle of this problem. What role does diplomacy play? Because ultimately, the best way to prevent a crisis is to stop it from happening in the first place, right?
Absolutely. Diplomacy is probably the most important solution of all. When countries talk to each other, share their concerns, and try to find agreements, the risk of conflict goes down. Many experts believe that the best way to keep the Strait of Hormuz open and safe is through peaceful negotiation.
But diplomacy seems to be getting harder these days, not easier. There are so many competing interests in that region, and trust between some of the major countries is very low.
You're right, and that is one of the biggest challenges. Trust is hard to build and easy to break, but history shows us that even in very difficult situations, diplomacy can work. It takes patience, a willingness to listen, and sometimes compromise, which means both sides giving up something.
Compromise is such an important word and an important concept. In any relationship, whether it's between people or between countries, compromise is usually necessary to find a solution that works for everyone. Nobody gets everything they want, but everybody gets something.
That is beautifully said, Ryan. And I think this idea applies beyond politics, too. In our personal lives, at work, and in our communities, learning to compromise and communicate is essential. But back to the global situation, international organizations also play a role.
You mean organizations like the United Nations?
Yes, the United Nations and other international bodies can help bring countries together, create rules for safe shipping, and mediate disputes. They can also help create agreements that all countries in the region can follow. It is not perfect, but it is an important part of keeping peace.
Let us also talk about the role of technology. I feel like technology could be part of the solution in ways that many people do not think about.
You are absolutely right. Technology is already playing a role. For example, advanced satellite systems can monitor ship movements in the strait in real time. This helps countries know exactly what is happening and respond quickly if there's a problem.
And I imagine that better ship technology also helps. Modern tankers have better safety features, better navigation systems, and better communication tools. All of these things make it safer for ships to pass through narrow and tense waters.
Yes, and there's also the technology behind alternative energy. Electric cars, solar panels, battery storage systems, and hydrogen fuel cells are all advancing quickly. The faster these technologies develop, the less the world will depend on oil, and the less power the Strait of Hormuz will have over the global economy.
So in a way, every electric car that is sold, every solar panel that is installed, and every wind turbine that is built is a small step toward reducing the risk from the Strait of Hormuz. That's a really interesting way to think about it.
It is. And it shows that individuals can play a part too, not just governments and big companies. When you choose to use less energy or when you support clean energy, you're contributing to a bigger change that makes the world less vulnerable to these kinds of crises.
That is empowering to hear. Sometimes when we talk about global problems, people feel helpless, like there's nothing they can do. But you're saying that everyday choices do matter, even if the impact seems small.
Every big change starts with small actions. If millions of people make small changes, the combined effect is enormous. So yes, individual choices absolutely matter. And being informed, like our listeners are right now, is the first step toward making better choices.
I want to go back to the economic impact for a moment, because I think there's another angle we haven't discussed yet. What happens to developing countries if there's a major crisis at the Strait of Hormuz? Are they affected differently than wealthier countries?
That's a really important question. And the answer is yes. Developing countries are often hit much harder by energy crises. Wealthier countries have strategic reserves, diverse economies, and the financial resources to absorb higher costs. Developing countries often do not have these protections.
So a country that is already struggling economically would face even bigger problems. Higher fuel prices mean higher costs for transportation, manufacturing, and food production. And these costs get passed on to ordinary people who may already be living on very tight budgets.
Exactly. In some developing countries, a sharp increase in fuel prices can lead to real hardship. People can't afford to get to work, farmers can't afford to transport their crops to market, and businesses can't afford to operate. It can create a chain reaction of economic pain.
That is really heartbreaking to think about. And it shows how unfair these situations can be. The countries that have the least to do with the political tensions are often the ones that suffer most from the consequences.
It is unfair, and it's one of the reasons why the international community needs to work together to prevent these crises. A disruption at the Strait of Hormuz is not just a problem for the rich oil-importing countries. It's a problem for everyone, especially those who are least able to cope.
Let us also talk about what ordinary people can do to prepare for potential energy disruptions, not just the Strait of Hormuz, but any kind of energy crisis. Are there practical steps individuals can take?
Yes, there are. First, being aware and informed is important. When you understand how the global energy system works, you can make better decisions about your own energy use. For example, reducing your dependence on cars that use gasoline by walking, cycling, or using public transportation can save money and reduce your vulnerability.
And I think being financially prepared is also important. Having some savings set aside can help during times when prices rise suddenly. It gives you a cushion so that unexpected cost increases do not cause a personal financial crisis.
That is great advice. Also, if you own a home, investing in energy efficiency can make a big difference. Better insulation, energy-efficient appliances, and even small solar panels can reduce your energy bills and your dependence on external energy supplies.
These are all practical, achievable steps. You do not need to be wealthy or have special knowledge to do these things. They are simple actions that anyone can take.
Exactly. And collectively, these small actions can reduce a country's overall demand for imported oil. If demand goes down, the power that any single shipping route or oil-producing country has over the global economy also goes down.
Now, Priya, I want to ask you a bigger question. Do you think the world will eventually move past oil? Will there come a time when a crisis at the Strait of Hormuz simply does not matter anymore because the world no longer depends on oil?
That is the big question, is it not? I think the answer is yes, but it will take time. The transition away from oil is already happening, but it is happening slowly. Oil is still deeply embedded in our economies, our transportation systems, and our industries. Changing all of that takes decades, not years.
So, for the foreseeable future, the Strait of Hormuz will remain critically important. Even as we move toward renewable energy, oil will still play a major role for many years to come.
That is correct. And that is why it's so important to manage the risks now. We cannot wait until the world no longer needs oil to address the dangers at the Strait of Hormuz. We need solutions today. Diplomacy, alternative routes, strategic reserves, and continued investment in clean energy.
It's like fixing the roof while the sun is shining, not waiting until it's already raining. You prepare for the problem before the problem arrives.
That is a wonderful way to put it. And I think that philosophy applies to so many areas of life, not just global energy. Being proactive, thinking ahead, and preparing for challenges is always better than reacting to them after they've already caused damage.
Let's also mention something that I think is important for our listeners as English learners. This topic is the kind of thing that comes up in news articles, in conversations at work, and in discussions with friends. Understanding it gives you the ability to participate in those conversations confidently.
That is such a good point, Ryan. Learning English is not just about grammar and vocabulary. It's also about understanding the world around you and being able to discuss real issues in English. When you can talk about global economics, energy, and world events, your English becomes much more powerful and useful.
And that is exactly why we chose this topic for today's episode. We wanted to give you something that is both educational and practical. You are learning new words, new concepts, and new ideas that you can use in real conversations.
Some of the useful words and expressions from today's episode include things like strait, which means a narrow passage of water, sanctions, diversify, ripple effect, strategic reserves, diplomacy, and compromise. These are all words that appear frequently in news and professional discussions.
Those are excellent words to add to your vocabulary. And if any of them are new to you, I encourage you to write them down, look up their meanings, and try to use them in a sentence. That is one of the best ways to remember new vocabulary.
Absolutely. Practice makes perfect, as they say. And the more you engage with real-world topics in English, the faster your language skills will improve. So keep listening, keep reading, and keep practicing.
Now, before we start wrapping up, I want to touch on one more thing. We talked about the Strait of Hormuz specifically, but are there other similar choke points in the world that people should know about?
Yes, great question. The Strait of Hormuz is the most important one for oil, but there are others. The Suez Canal in Egypt is another critical waterway. It connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, and a huge amount of trade passes through it every day.
I remember when a large cargo ship got stuck in the Suez Canal a few years ago. It blocked the canal for several days, and it caused massive delays in global shipping. That single incident showed how fragile her global supply chains can be.
Yes, that was a really eye-opening event.
Another important choke point is the Strait of Malacca, which is between Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia. A huge amount of trade between Asia, the Middle East, and Europe passes through that strait. If it were blocked, it would also cause enormous disruption.
So the global economy depends on a few very narrow passages of water, and any disruption at any one of them can cause problems worldwide. That is both fascinating and a little bit scary.
It is, and it reminds us how interconnected the modern world is. What happens on one side of the planet can quickly affect people on the other side. We are all part of the same global system, whether we realize it or not.
That is a great perspective to close this discussion with. We are all connected. What happens in the Strait of Hormuz matters to a family in Tokyo, a farmer in Kenya, a student in London, and a shopkeeper in Sydney. We are all part of this global story.
And understanding that connection is what makes us more informed, more thoughtful, and more prepared. So I really hope our listeners feel that they have gained something valuable from today's episode. This was a complex topic, but I think we covered it in a clear and accessible way.
I agree. Let us do a quick summary of what we discussed today. We started by explaining what the Strait of Hormuz is, a narrow waterway between Iran, Oman, and the UAE, where about 20% of the world oil passes through every day.
Then we talked about why there is a crisis. Political tensions, military activities, sanctions, and the risk of conflict have made this area increasingly dangerous. Even threats of disruption cause fear and economic uncertainty around the world.
We explored how a disruption at the strait would affect the global economy. Oil prices would spike, and because oil is connected to nearly everything, the cost of food, transportation, manufacturing, and daily life would all increase. This is the ripple effect.
We discussed how different countries would be affected, with developing nations often suffering the most because they have fewer resources to absorb the shock. We also talked about several solutions, including diversifying energy sources, building strategic reserves, creating alternative shipping routes, and investing in renewable energy.
We emphasized the importance of diplomacy, communication, and international cooperation. Preventing a crisis is always better than reacting to one. We also talked about how individuals can play a role by making smart energy choices and staying informed.
Finally, we mentioned other important choke points around the world, like the Suez Canal and the Strait of Malacca, to show that the Strait of Hormuz is just one part of a larger picture of global interconnection.
I think that's a really solid summary. Priya, thank you for such a great conversation today. You explained everything so clearly, and I think our listeners really benefited from your insights.
Thank you, Ryan. You guided the conversation beautifully, and I think we covered a lot of ground in a way that was easy to follow. I really enjoyed this episode, and I hope our listeners did too.
And to everyone listening, thank you so much for spending your time with us. We know your time is valuable, and we really appreciate you choosing to listen to the Easy English Talk podcast. Your support means the world to us.
Yes, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We create these episodes for you, and knowing that you are out there listening and learning makes all the hard work worth it. Please keep coming back, and please keep practicing your English every single day.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a comment, share it with a friend, and let us know what topics you would like us to cover in the future. We always love hearing from you, and your suggestions help us create better content.
And if you haven't already, take some time to explore the other episodes on the Easy English Talk podcast channel. We have covered many different topics that can help you improve your English and learn about important subjects at the same time. There's something for everyone.
That's right. Whether you're interested in personal growth, world events, communication skills, or everyday English, we have episodes that can help you learn and grow. Just scroll through our channel and pick something that interests you. Every episode is designed to help you learn and grow.
Thank you once again, everyone. Take care of yourselves, keep learning, and we'll see you in the next episode of Easy English Talk podcast. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone. Stay curious, stay kind, and keep improving. See you next time.